not the Umschlagplatz monument, not all the signs on the buildings of the route that is a historical route through the ghetto. So it was a much more almost completely invisible space. Really the only visible sign was the monument, and in front of the monument there was just grass with multiple ladies in very bad bathing suits of the late communist times. So that contrast, I think, was in some ways there always, but different because there were no fancy cafes and bike shops and stuff. It was interesting to see this in a film, contemporary Warsaw. And I can very much relate to that sense of schizophrenic existence of getting on a bus at Esperanto Street, named after the language invented by Zamenhof, across the street from the Jewish cemetery at Okopowa, and going to the university and having an exam in Latin and worrying about it. But I did live for 2 years, literally in the heart of it. And as I was reading for seminars, mostly Warsaw Ghetto diaries and memoirs, I experienced that sense of increasingly being caught in a duality of the space. And at some point I moved across the river to, as far away from Muranow as I could, to the neutral space in Warsaw, if there is one.
Interesting. If I could correct you a little bit on what you said, I mean, even the monuments of Jewish Warsaw, there was a number of them long before the current situation. If you walked around, you would find here and there all kinds of items that were sometimes surprising. So, and that include the bunker where the leaders of the Warsaw Ghetto, they had the last stand. I don't know. I mean, there are other things. The wall itself, remnants of the wall, and I can't even think at the moment all the different elements. But to someone who knew what to look for, you would find a striking number of things. So now, of course, you're correct. The number of monuments has become very large, including the tracing of the ghetto itself, and the path with markers throughout to tell you exactly where it was, which is very striking, very powerful. And I think that for many people who are watching here, there's long been a tendency to look at Poland as a place that sort of was very happy to forget its Jewish past and very happy to forget, the plight of Jews, certainly in the modern period and during the Holocaust. And it's simply not true. I mean, it's a more complex story than that. I think the story told by the people who are interviewed tells you that it's a more complex story than that. It's true that memory in Europe in general, memory of Jews in Europe in general, has become very common and very fashionable. But nonetheless, it's not as simplistic as most American Jews like to think, particularly when it comes to talking about Poles and Jewish memory. And I also want to say something about the film. It is magnificently photographed, filmed. It makes Muranow look incredibly beautiful and charming. And that's the tribute to the cameraman or camera people. I thought they were really good photographers. And I liked looking at the images that they presented. I thought that the characters who were interviewed on camera were terrific. They were excellent. So I felt all the, like when I was putting together the festival, prior to looking at this film, I didn't think we had a really good film. I thought we had some good films, but nothing that really blew me away and said, this is really fantastic. and this is really the first film I looked at where I felt this is truly a fantastic film. It's really, it warrants being an opener for the festival. So I'll shut up at that, but I'd like to hear more of your comments. Anyone agree or disagree, or people have, responses to the film?
At first, I thought it was going to be kind of boring, but it was actually very enticing, and I like the beautiful scenery in Poland and in that area. I like the way they compared it to 1939 and that area, and the film that they had of that. I thought all the people who spoke were very knowledgeable about a different part of the history and the contemporary time. I really don't believe in ghosts, but obviously they do. But there was a comment made there by one of the young people they interviewed that said, better to be afraid of the living than the dead. So I thought it was really interesting.
I did want to say something about ghosts, and I like the fact that people were in communication with the past, and they're in communication with the past on a very visceral level and a very emotional level. And they did it partly by articulating these strange beings who inhabited their apartments, who co-inhabited their apartments. And this idea that the past doesn't disappear, it's like the old statement by what's his name, the great American writer, about the South and the past, that the past is not over. It's not the past. It's not even, it's not even, the past isn't dead. It's not even the past. And I think it speaks well to how the past functions in so many situations, that there's a continuity between the past and the present that sometimes surprises us, that people do live with a sense of the past all around us, even if they're not conscious of it. I thought it was a very profound idea, and makes me think a lot about where we live. I was taking a drive to Steinhatchee the other day, some godforsaken little fishing village in Florida. Well, I shouldn't say, it's actually quite cute. And we're driving, and then suddenly see a sign that says a Confederate cemetery. And it's closed off area. It's on a private property. But if you look beyond the fence, you can see these gravestones, which are clearly from the late 19th century. And we don't think so much about that, about the presence of the Confederacy here in Florida, but it's there. And anyway, we all live with another past, with a buried past. That's my point.
If I could add a comment, Jack, Stuart Cohn. I've spent quite a bit of time in Poland. I've taught at the University of Warsaw 19 times, so I feel almost like a citizen there. And I've been in the Muranow area. I thought the film was excellent. I really thank you so much for whoever selected it. Thank you for selecting it. It was very moving, and I thought the portion dealing with the ghosts and the basements and the bones underneath the buildings, very, very powerful symbols. One thing that really wasn't discussed in the film, and I don't know if the film really wanted to discuss it, was the fact that although so many Jews, I think they said 200,000 Jews lived in the Muranow area, the Jews were never considered to be Polish. You were Polish or you were Jewish. And that is still true today. I've seen that in conversations that I've had. It's actually somewhat true in some other European countries as well. The Jews were not native to Poland. They were always an outside group. Even when they lived in Warsaw, they had their own newspapers, they had their own theater, they had their own language. It was not Polish. They had their own dress, they had their own food. There was a real sense of not belonging. There was an otherness that was there, even when they were living right in the heart of the city. There were actually, I believe, 400,000 Jews that were living in Poland as of 1939. The Poles today, I don't think have, the ones that I dealt with were totally academic. And I never sensed any sense of anti-Semitism among the people that I dealt with, but there certainly is a very, very continuing strong strain, which is reflected in that film about with the marching, with their annual Independence Day or whatever it was, the marching, and a couple of the commentaries you saw from some of the people who were interviewed. It's very unfortunate, but it's there. It continues to exist outside of I think a very small band of people in Poland. It's very, very unfortunate. The area of Muranow, of course, was the Warsaw Ghetto area. I was surprised that the film did not focus a little bit more on the magnificent new museum. There was a picture of it. You saw it through someone's window. Magnificent museum that's been built called the 1,000-year history of the Polish Jewish people. Magnificent. And lots of school children are taken there every day, which I think is a very positive sign. But to me, the film, while it was powerful, I thought could have had a little bit more of a background reflecting what I thought really was two different worlds that existed. And I think because those two different worlds existed, I think that is reflected in many of the comments that we heard during the film of, okay, it's over, let's get on with it.
Where do I do my handwriting?
Sorry? Alice, if you hold on just 1 second, I just wanted to answer something that Stuart said. The reason I said before, it's a much more complicated issue, and Natalia Alexian is here, will certainly can fill you in, fill us all in a great deal. But to say that the Jews were not considered Poles, were not part of Poland, etc., it's a complex story. Some absolutely were, and considered themselves absolutely Polish. And much to my surprise, we had a faculty member here who was a granddaughter of one of the leaders of the Bund, of the Jewish Labor Bund. And when I met her father, who was a prince of the Bund, I was surprised to find out that the language at home was Polish. They didn't speak a word of Yiddish. And there was a whole class of intellectuals and political activists in the Jewish community who were as Polish as they were Jewish. So Alice, you had something to say.
Well, I just wanted to counter the negative sense of the martyrology in the film, because actually, as I was watching it, I felt very hopeful that at least in Poland, there were these Polish intellectuals and filmmakers who were concerned with the issue. There was people who were positively thinking about it, versus a place like Transylvania, where the history has been disappeared. And they're not thinking about ghosts because they're not interested in remembering it's a real active effort to destroy the memory. And this is a positive sign, I think. I mean, the film itself, not the.
I agree. And I just want to add something to this too, and that is that it's an article that I wrote a long time ago and collaborated with someone from the Agolonian University. that to look at the emergence of memory of Jews in Poland today, and it's true, I think, throughout much of Europe, you have to look at the emergence of another other within Europe. And the more you have people who are considered these new foreigners, these new strangers who are threatening the sense of national purity and national culture, the more easier it is to evoke the Jews nostalgically, because they appear to be the good strangers, the ones who are really they fitted in better, even though people don't remember so well that there was a time when they didn't consider them fitting in all that well. But the fact of the matter is that what you see in the film is part of a transnational European phenomenon of the emergence of a certain kind of nostalgia towards the dead Jews. I mean, it's like.
But there's more. There was a line in the movie about bones,
right,
about the bricks made with bones,
right,
and that I don't think you're going to find that in other literatures where there were still dead bodies that were probably made with bones, you know, in the rebuilding. Also, I was thinking about something very not martyred, and that is the fall of the wall. When I went back to East Berlin after, you know, years later, I was very disoriented because I couldn't figure out where I had walked and been in the past because my marker was gone. And so people have, you know, that was a decision made by the Germans to completely eradicate that wall, which could have been a tourist attraction, right? But they got rid of it in order to get rid of that presence.
Well, they did keep the Checkpoint Charlie as a tourist attraction.
Yeah, that's the only thing.
Any other comments or thoughts?
Well,
Natalia,
Great
you look
Wall-
like you're either falling asleep or you have something you really want to dying to
The Great
say.
Wall of China was built with bones. So
Right.
that's another place where the wall was built with bones.
You know, Walter Benjamin's comment about all the great achievements of human beings being based upon the misery of humans. You know, all the great museums in Europe are, you know, stuff that happened through, you know, the colonial raping of Africa and other parts of the third world. So, you know, the tie-in between this unhappiness and the abuse of other human beings and great cultural achievements has long been talked about in cultural studies.
Jack, it's Bob. Let me ask you. There may have been some, let's say, cultural removal of the Jews in Poland at the time, but certainly there wasn't that disconnect in Germany. And yet, arguably, that's where the Holocaust began. So my question is, not to draw issue to the cultural relationships between the Poles and the Jews and the Germans and the Jews, but my question is, what's the role of the church in all of this? It seems to me that that's the elephant in the room that kind of gets pushed under the rug. What's your response to that?
Again, I hesitate to speak as long as Natalia's around. But,
well, I think when we're talking about issues like this, we have to be very transparent, very honest, and yeah, that's a painful issue. But I think we should take it on courageously.
I think the church is a complex issue as well. And Natalia, perhaps you would answer this? Natalia.
Yeah, I just disappeared so that you feel more comfortable. No, I do want to say though that what which is in a way, I think, a response that what's interesting is that the vast majority of these hopeful young voices are Polish Jews, or people who are in the process of reconnecting with their Jewish heritage. So, this is a question to what extent this attentiveness to the sounds of Jewish ghosts is an attentiveness to the sounds of however complicated and distant and not clearly known relatives. But the church, I mean, it's this is where the problem, I think, lies and continues to lie. And there is a small fraction of the Catholic clergy that is open and interested and active. There is very active, tiny Protestant community, and in many of the initiatives that have to do with Christian-Jewish dialogue and some kind of coming close to hearing Jewish side of that story, or it's often clergy representing the churches that are minority and are marginalized in the public discourse. And I can go into detail, but the vast majority of Polish Catholic Church is made of small town village sons for whom this is still an upward mobility path of having a career and a sense of power and authority. And they don't exactly get educated into multiculturalism or Judaism being an important part of and any of this. So it's not a helpful actor in this story.
I do want to add to this. I mean, why are we so surprised? I mean, what do we see elsewhere? When we drive through the countryside here, through much of the United States, we see the right wing. Where is it coming from? The church must be playing an important role in this. The pastors must be playing an important role. And they're clearly not advocates of multiculturalism and tolerance. I was just talking to my former caterer here, who is Palestinian Israeli, and talking about, who is not anti-Israel to say the least. She's not, but nonetheless, the stories that she was telling about her family's experience in Israel, in a Palestinian village, are horrific, really. So, and we see the ways in which if you follow the news in Israel, you see the ways in which, the right-wing religious people in Israel are hardly, advocates of multiculturalism and tolerance. So, it's like the big surprise to all of us is that, most people in the world are not that tolerant. They're not that generous towards minorities and towards others. I mean, this is the great tragedy of the world, I think. It makes me more, I'm less hostile, I'm less angry at Poland. The more I look at my own society, this society, the more I look at Israel, I realize it's a very screwed up world we live in. And I don't have a good word to say about most of the religious people who are running how people look at the world. So,
the other observation I want to make about the film is that made me uncomfortable was the manufacture of life in Warsaw in 1939. I think anytime we try to alter history, we run the risk of telling a lie. And that's even true today as we determine which books are appropriate and which books are inappropriate. Jack, incidentally, I think the tourist study is canceled next week for that reason, but we don't have to get into that. So, but did anybody else have any concerns about the manufacture of life in Poland that was being done at the end of the film?
I want to show you something that's in my collection here. Natalie would know what these are. These are sort of tourist art in a sense that you could buy. I'm not sure if you can still quite buy this. Can you see this? These were made for tourists. They're sort of Hasidim on the Chokel. They're on a spring.
They had that in the movie.
They had in the
They
movie.
showed
Okay.
that
I
in
didn't
the
see the whole movie again because some screw up. But usually, what they have the text, not in this one, but usually in this case, the text is from a siddur that was clipped out of a siddur. Sometimes in the old days, if you're very lucky, you would get ones that were clipped out of the communist Yiddish newspaper. So, and attached. And this is when, as the tourism became even more pronounced in Poland, you had these things that were made in Hong Kong or China, whatever, that are really mass manufactured. And then traveling to Poland under the grand old days of communism, you could find this in an art store, which I didn't realize quite what I was buying when I bought it. It seems like a lot of money at the time was $5. And you can see what he's holding here is an actual piece of Torah that was clipped out of a Torah. And this is a phenomenon that there's a great deal of people, tourists or travelers who've written on things like that, on what could be purchased at a certain time in the 60s and 50s and so on. And then more recently, what struck me that you had this kind of artwork that was I could purchase in Warsaw from someone who was making these for tourists, but then things which became look like to me Holocaust art. The family sort of protecting itself, a father protecting a child, and even a whole family that's huddling together. So I just thought I would show you some of this.
I wonder if I might be able to get back to the comment that Bob made, although I'd say, Jack, that that art, which as Marcia pointed out, was noticed in the film, I actually find it quite somewhat offensive because it's so stereotypical. And it's the Jews that they're showing, there are no Jews like that, or there are very few that are around anymore like that. And that they're using this as a I don't know. I don't even know I have the right words for it, but I passed many kiosks that were selling those things, and I just find them to be offensive. Maybe I react too strongly, but I wanted to ask Bob. Bob, could you be a little more specific as to what you had in mind when you were talking about the manufacture of history in 1939?
I think the young artist, if I understand the film correctly, we're trying to create a scene from 1939, the day before or the day of the German invasion of Poland. And my concern with doing that, one is that it looked like it was filmed in the period, which bothered me. I think if one's going to film it in modern day and say, hey, look, we're filming this in modern day, this is what it is one thing. And that's debatable too, the appropriateness of that, but I think we can probably all live with that. But making it look as if this was filmed back at the time and using actors for that, I don't feel that that's appropriate in any way. And I feel that it's disingenuous, and I feel that it takes historical accuracy and diminishes it. Stuart, that's what I was trying to say. And I don't know if others feel the same or different.
I did think that hologram or whatever it was, where those scientists are recreating what the city looked like in 1939. I thought that was very interesting, trying to recreate the area through computer imagery. Thought that was a
It's
very
fascinating. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, no, it was the scene. It was the scene of the people
right. I
that
understand.
that I found to be disturbing.
Well, historical reconstruction, has this very strong imaginary component to it. And when you read, work done by historians, you're engaging in some act of imagination on their part and on your part as a reader. So, it's not always pleasant. It's not. Sometimes it is disturbing, but it's part of the process of what we all do, whether as historians or anthropologists, whatever. We're trying to figure out, trying to imagine what reality is about.
Well, if all right, let me thank you. Thank you for that, and I thank you for considering the question. Let me say that.
Virginia, it looks like you want to speak. Can't hear you. Okay.
No,
Well, Virginia. All right. Anyway, I thought it's a terrific film. I was quite impressed with it, and I was very happy when I first screened it, and very happy to begin the festival with this. So it's interesting because the festival is going to be framed by another kind of odd film, which is the Vigil or Der Schäumer, and about someone who takes guards a corpse in a traditional ritual sense, and encounters ghosts or a ghost in that way as well. And it makes a nice link, these two films, to one another. This film's a very, very professional film. The one we just saw, the last film is much less so. But it's an interesting effort and well worthwhile looking at. So the idea of taking a Yiddish film or making a contemporary Yiddish film and doing it within the context of a horror film is quite daring, in my opinion. And I recommend that you look at it. It's probably one of the more interesting examples of contemporary American Jewish cultural activities. There are any number of superb films in this festival, as usual, and I can't point out anyone in particular and say, well, you got to see this one and don't see that one. They're all interesting, and they're interesting in different ways. So I strongly encourage you to see them all. And there's no stinkers in them. There's no film that's not good. There's no film that you wish that wasn't included. And that's part of the problem of organizing the festivals, that there's too many worthwhile films. Rachel has suggested to me yesterday that it'd be better if we had fewer films. But the truth is there are many, many worthwhile films. And I think it behooves us to look at as many as we can, to encourage them to say, wow, what a wonderful time to be alive when so many, as a Jew, when so many strikingly good films are being made. So on Jewish subjects. So I did comment to Virginia at the beginning that I thought I'd prefer to be organizing a festival on some other topic than a Jewish topic. There would be better films, but I take it back. I think there are really enough good films. So, and it always surprises me each year when we manage to find them. It's like, but they're there, and they're, if you like these kind of subjects, the film Winter Journey is a superb film. It's a film that I considered having as the opener because it's that good. And if you don't mind a little bit of controversy, then Kiss Me Kosher is great fun, and I do recommend it. So there's a lot of good stuff to look at. So thank you for showing up to the talkback. And
Jack, if I could end on at least an upbeat note, because I did sound pretty sour in my initial comments. There is a resurgence of Judaism in Israel, in Poland, which is very heartwarming to see. The first time that I was there was 1999, there was only one Seder in the entire country, was held in Warsaw. A few years later, there were 13 Seders around the country, and Poland was developing its own Polish Haggadah. And I went to a Seder at the synagogue. There were Polish young men in the payasses and the robes. It's a real throwback. Polish, conducting a Seder. There are now kosher restaurants in Poland, in Warsaw. I don't know about the other cities. I've had Jewish students. I had one student who couldn't take my exam when I wanted to give it because it was during Pesach. There's a resurgence, and it's very, it's like you can't stop Judaism from sprouting in Poland. It's an amazing situation, but it's at least heartwarming to see that. And as I say, this museum, it's worth a trip to Poland just to see this museum. It is absolutely fabulous.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, there's a question in the chat. Yes, Jamie, please go ahead and ask. Anybody can ask questions. It is open, so please do.
Wanted to make sure.
Yeah, no, for sure. Go ahead.
This is my first experience with Jewish studies. I'm taking a class with Professor Kunjundis. I hope I came close to pronouncing his name correctly. And so I'm not Jewish. I've never studied anything in Jewish history before his film class. And so my question would be, from people who are Jewish or from people who have studied Jewish history, how effective do you believe this film to be to educate someone on the outside like me who's had absolutely zero contact with it beforehand? Was this a good teacher for somebody who is learning for the first time about this history?
I think it is. I think it's a good start. It's what takes you into Jewish Warsaw today and Jewish Warsaw in the past. So I think it certainly gets you started. But you have to take the panoply of the films if you want to get the introduction to Jewish life and Jewish culture. Then there's an awful lot of films to look at. So I recommend doing that. I know you'll be doing that as part of your class. So there's just a lot of good stuff to look at.
Jamie, welcome to the family. Thank you for taking this class, and hopefully it's going to be a positive experience for you.
Well, Bob, it's a very positive experience because this year, for the first time, you can actually watch the films and eat popcorn.
All right. But your question is very. Your question has a lot of depth to it, and you can tell that in talking about the Holocaust, that triggers a nerve amongst many, such that there's a difference between Judaism pre-Holocaust and post-Holocaust. One may argue that, but that is the reality of it. Considering that the Holocaust took 1 out of 3 Jews off this world, and you can understand that hits quite a nerve, and that is a complex question. And so anything that touches on the Holocaust like this, which it does, doesn't really answer the question at all. And I think what you're seeing here is people trying to wrestle with the past, those living in that particular location. But there is a lot more to it pertaining to the Holocaust. So I would just leave that with you. And you're probably getting 2 different points of view, one from me and one from Jack. But there you have it.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Well, I think that's a positive note to end on, don't you all?
Well, sure. And, just add to it that there's no one answer to this. You need to really look very widely, and you will learn. Where are you seeing the chats?
Okay, chats usually pop up on the right-hand side of your screen, or there'll be a little flag on the bottom that tells you that there's something in the chat, and then you click on it and it opens up on the side.
But there's no other chats, right?
No, there's no other questions. So unless anyone
Well, I
else
had a
has a
question.
question. What's your question?
Where are the chats?
Okay. For everyone who tuned in tonight, we're going to be using the same Zoom link. I will continue to send it out every day because there'll be different people on the list. But for those of you who bought passes and who are going to see everything, it is the same Zoom link for all the chats this time. They're all at 7:30 except for the very last one, which is at 8:30 because of daylight savings time. But we tried to make things consistent for you this year to make it a little bit easier to juggle the tech.
Can I ask a question to you, those who obviously were here? There's sort of like a little discussion going on in my head about the how wise it is to have the chats disconnected from the screening of the film. So in the past, we would screen the film and then have a chat, which meant that we were in the theater, if we were at the theater, till after 9 o'clock. And some people found that too late. Any thoughts on this, on the best way to do this? Gail?
The time thing isn't really an issue for me since we're night people. But yeah, no offhand suggestions.
Sorry?
I said I didn't have any suggestions. Oh, it's black. Why is it black?
You don't find the disconnect between showing the film and the discussion a problem?
Well, we always program it exactly so that, excuse me, exactly so that it ends right before the discussion. So this time we ran a little bit short, actually. I had a bunch of people in the yard and we had 2 more minutes or 3 more minutes to go. So for December, we programmed it so that we saw the film right before it was fresh.
Mhm. Okay. All right, we'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Have a good night, everybody. Thank you for coming.